Arthur, good morning. It's good to see you, though I wish under slightly different circumstances for the topic we have to discuss. As the retail reporter here at CNBC, I follow these companies very closely and in great detail. And I have to admit, if we use the NRF's number of 52 million Americans working in the retail sector that is effectively shut down, I'm very worried about what's going to happen once this passes, whenever that may be. What is going to happen to all of these retail workers?
Well, the good news in this stimulus bill is that workers are coming first. As you correctly point out, Courtney, almost 1 in 4 workers in America works in the retail trade. And the vast majority of them are part-timers, and they've all been laid off or furloughed as mall traffic has collapsed. Mall traffic in the third week of March was down 80%. And I'm sure this week it's down 90% plus. So these people are the most troubled people in America, and they are significant contributors to the economy and, of course, significant wage earners for their families, often second incomes for families that need it very much. So from their point of view, I'm delighted that the stimulus bill is addressing them first. Now, whether the loan guarantees and the direct loans to retail companies come to pass, we'll have to see how it's written in the legislation. But it's going to need to be very precise with respect to companies that are successful and don't need a lot of help, and those that are struggling and need a considerable amount of help. We'll have to see how that language develops.
And it's funny because even the companies that I think most would consider healthy by many of the different liquidity measures you would look at, like a Best Buy I'm thinking of, or TJX companies, still they're tapping into these revolving lines of credit. They're sort of shoring up their balance sheet because they don't have the revenue flowing into stores that they normally do. Does any of that give you concern or raise a red flag about the need to raise this capital?
Well, there's a big red flag for lots of companies that go into this crisis over-leveraged. And with the diminished demand that's available out there, it puts them in a very perilous position, and the imminent bankruptcies that could flow from that. So the successful ones are dipping into their lines of credit against the possibility of a longer shutdown. Now, we have no idea what the public health implications will be over the next several weeks and months. So workers could be furloughed for a long period of time. So direct support of those workers is important to having them be economically sound and ready to spend as well as work when the retail industry is back in business, whatever that might be.
You know, obviously, online sales get an awful lot of attention because that is the growth area of retail. But you and I both know that the majority of sales are still happening in stores. Still, if you don't have stores as your option, because as we know, if they don't sell essentials, they're likely closed right now. Do you believe that shoppers that are ordering items online that maybe they didn't before will have that behavior permanently change? That is to say, they won't go to those stores anymore.
I think the theory is correct. I think there's definitely going to be a migration. I'm not quite sure at what pace yet, to more use of online commerce to satisfy one's needs, whether they be essentials or discretionary purchases. Once you learn how to do it, it's awfully easy. And of course, Amazon has shown us how easy it can be. And I can guarantee you that we'll see some migration. I don't think it's going to be seismic. Companies that have 25% of their business in e-commerce today are not going to go to 50% overnight once the brick and mortar stores reopen. But it will creep up. It will creep up 2, 3, 4% a year until the right balance between bricks and mortar retail and e-com retail is found, which for me probably is somewhere between 40 and 50% of their revenue derived from e-commerce.
If you were a CEO right now running one of these retail companies selling discretionary items, perhaps let's use Abercrombie Fitch as an example, since you used to be involved in that company, and you've got stores closed. What would be your message to employees that are afraid about the future of their jobs and their company because of all of this?
Well, my message would be, in the case of Abercrombie, which has pretty ample cash resources itself, is to make it very clear that we had staying power, that we have staying power to see our way through this crisis and out the back end. And if the government is there with loan guarantees or direct loans to make sure that happens, that's the most important thing. I think one of the big challenges for retailers like Abercrombie and others in that part of the retail sector is the continuous flow of goods that's occurring with no opportunity to sell it. Now, there'll be some activity through e-com, but there's a huge backup in the supply chain of goods that will need to be relieved and sold. And I think merchandise margins in the sector are going to be tremendously impacted over the second and third quarter of this year.
That is definitely a big story I think we need to continue to follow, hopefully with your help. But before we let you go, I'd like to ask you, one more sort of final question. It seems that it was the U.S. consumer that really propped up the U.S. economy for quite a long time. Do you think the U.S. consumer could be sort of the leg that takes us down lower from here because of this virus?
Well, there's still enormous uncertainty in the public's mind, and this stimulus bill makes headlines and ultimately it'll have great economic effect. But I think Americans are worried and frightened, as they should be, of this pandemic. They're sheltering in place. The news is not great from a public health point of view. And what I hope is that the business people and our elected leaders follow the science here and allow this pandemic to be treated and hopefully run its course and allow business to get back to normal, whatever new normal is. And that's a whole other conversation. But get back to normal as quickly as possible.